Welcome to Gen X Adulting. And today we are talking about attachment styles. There are 4 attachment styles. There's anxious attachment. Um, there is avoidant, which sometimes is called dismissive. There is fearful avoidant, which is sometimes called disorganized. And there is secure attachment. And your attachment style starts off based on it's rooted in your childhood and your experiences with your caregivers. And it's not necessarily anything your caregivers did intentionally. It can be, obviously, if there is abuse involved or neglect, but it also definitely can result from things that your caregivers did not do on purpose or with intent. So you kind of start off with a certain attachment style, but that attachment style can change based on different experiences through your life. So you could be shifted to a totally different attachment style based on if a trauma happens in your life or if healing happens in your life. If you go on a healing journey, you can completely adjust and pivot your attachment style depending on what happens in your life. So I think we're going to do a brief overview of the 4 attachment styles. Just to be clear, we are not experts. We are not doctors. We are not therapists. This is just us having a general discussion about it. And then we are going to share our personal thoughts on our own attachment styles and possibly even delve into how those attachment styles have affected our marriage over the last almost 31 years. While we're discussing the general overview, we may put up some graphics on the screen for those watching on YouTube. You'll be able to see those. So, but should we start with anxious attachment?
Yeah, we could. There's a really cool resource out there called the attachmentproject.com.
Yeah.
Worth checking out. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Those
actually
would probably be some of the graphics we put up. It
from
talks
there.
about going from childhood all the way through adulthood and a very interesting history on the guy who started that.
Right.
But go ahead.
So for anxious attachment, anxious attached people crave closeness. They crave intimacy. They have a strong fear of abandonment. They think, this is all in general, but they think less of themselves and more highly of others. So their self-worth is lower than how they see other people. They're always afraid that their partner may leave the relationship or that their partner's feelings are not as strong as theirs. I think that they have issues with trusting and that a partner is going to stay. And that ties back to that fear of abandonment. Yeah. And then just the negative self view.
These seem to be an external locus of control as well. What I was reading is that they tend to be the pursuers of relationships.
Okay.
Right. So they're
trying
anxious.
to
They're
find,
anxious
yeah.
about the relationship. They're
Yeah.
pursuing making sure everything's good, possibly overcompensating. Those kind of things.
Yeah,
behaviors.
I think that they're highly codependent in a relationship and they are hyper aware of their partner's feelings and how their partner feels to the detriment of their own feelings and their own experience.
One of the bullet points here is they elevate their partner above themselves.
Right.
Kind of touches on what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
I mean, you could almost say, I'm sure there's times with anxious attached people that they're martyrs.
Potentially.
You know. And maybe they, I don't know, but maybe they think that they will find and secure someone if they just constantly put that person up on a pedestal. That person will want to stay with them and never leave them. And as long as they don't do anything wrong, like, and they may view not demanding, but setting a standard for themselves that they require a certain level of respect. They may view that as, if I demand that from my partner, they're going to leave me. So I'm going to make things as easy for my partner as possible.
Yeah.
So that I'm going to put no demands on my partner.
Yeah.
because I don't want them to leave me. Because I think with anxious attachment, it really always is rooted in fear of abandonment.
Yeah, probably.
So is that kind of what you found in your research?
Um,
Is that line up, I guess?
yeah, worries about being disappointed or abandoned. So
Yeah.
yeah, they're the one pursuing, making sure everything's okay. You know,
Yeah.
fear of losing the relationship.
Yeah, they're probably I would think people pleasers big time. So so then if we switch to avoidant or dismissive attachment, so they don't have very little interest in intimacy or closeness. They view themselves higher than others. So they're the opposite of an anxious. Their self-worth is higher than how they see other people. Um they're uncomfortable with closeness and intimacy. They do not like conflict, and when conflict arises, they tend to shut down, hence avoid the situation. Or anything that's a deep emotional situation, which obviously conflict is. They hate conflict. They have difficulty. They prefer independence and have difficulty with trust. And I think that ties into the intimacy and closeness because
Hmm.
you have to have trust in order to be close with someone. So,
This is an interesting one. One of the bullet points here is views dependence as a sign of weakness.
mm,
Not to skip ahead or but we've seen some of that in some of the commentary from the
yes,
men that light up some of the things, you know, that
yeah,
we've talked about.
absolutely. They're super independent, especially on an emotional level. Like
Yeah,
they they they're a hard nut to crack emotionally.
yeah,
They do not share their emotions easily.
yeah,
You know, they do not want to depend on others,
yep,
and they also don't want others to depend on them. So they don't do well in a codependent
yeah, yeah,
relationship. They also do not look to outside sources for approval or support. And that ties back to they have a high self worth. But that
yeah,
could be a detriment too, because if you don't really have decent self awareness, and if your ego is so high that you're with an avoidant, and their self worth is so high, um, and then we get into narcissism, but that's a totally different topic. You could be living in a completely disconnected relationship, a disconnected life because you're totally self sufficient in everything. So you're never really connecting to anyone.
yeah,
Like they avoid connection,
yeah.
if that makes sense. Um, yeah, and I think that's everything. And then
Well, there's one other bullet point on this thing I'm looking at is they challenge diverse perspectives, which
okay,
is kind of interesting. They don't necessarily want input from others in
okay.
this, you know, the psychoanalysis of it.
So they don't it's like their way, and they don't want to hear criticism or
Potentially.
any input.
But that could be go along with they want to avoid conflict or debate or having to open themselves up. It's almost like I don't really care what other perspectives are. I've got this figured out. I've got my box and walls around me type of thing. Right? That's kind of avoidant in
Yeah, so
nature.
it's like I wonder how avoidants are at work. Like if they're in charge of people
Um,
or if they're not in charge of people and need to be trained or guided, how they handle that input.
well, we're kind of skipping ahead because I think
Yes.
all these things operate on a spectrum, but I have a
Yes.
feeling in the technical world, uh, avoidance probably are the predominant screw,
Yeah, so
right?
we'll
Yeah,
touch
yeah,
on that as we're because right now again we're doing the general
yeah,
overview.
yeah.
So then there's the fearful avoidant. They can also be called the disorganized avoidant. They're a mix of the two. I think the fearful avoidant is chaotic.
Well, actually, the first two bullet points here are negative, insecure view of self, negative, insecure view of others.
Right.
Right? What's yeah?
They do have a history of trauma
It
or
seeks and avoids closeness,
yes.
longs for love and rejects intimacy.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay, so and that could be that push-pull tendency people do in
that
relationships.
disorganized.
The
Yeah, yeah,
disorganized or fearful avoidant could definitely do the push pull in a relationship where they give you a bunch of love or they love bomb you a bit. But then when you react to that, when their partner reacts to that, they pull away and they become distant. And so it's a game of I'm going to push you away and I'm going to pull you back. And I wonder if the fearful avoidant, if that's their style, because they want the love, but then when their partner comes towards them for more intimacy, they reject that intimacy. So being in a relationship with a fearful avoidant or a disorganized avoidant has got to be completely chaotic, and there's no trust. You could never trust where that person is coming from. Depending
Yeah,
on
yeah,
each day, you could be in a different situation with your relationship. Because how could you trust what what how they're going to act each day?
yeah,
And that can just be, and that could go on and on and on, and draw out.
yeah.
You know.
I'm looking into it. This could be. I have some of these tendencies.
Oh well, we're going to get to
Yeah, no,
that.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I'm looking at this and I flip
Yes.
to this other infographic I have, and I'm like, whoa, all right,
Yeah. Yeah. No, we're going to get
interesting.
to our personal attachment
Yeah,
styles
yeah,
in a minute. They
interesting.
have difficulty forming stable attachments. And this is the fearful, disorganized avoidant. And again, they may have both avoidant and anxious tendencies. Um, so the partner and relationship are both, okay, this is interesting, of the fearful, disorganized, and avoidant. Their partner and the relationship represents both their desire and their fear.
Yeah,
So coming from the disorganized, fearful, avoidant, it's being with someone is that person is their desire, but also their fear. So you're never committing to anything. You're just constantly in fluid motion with this. There's never any stability. There's
yeah,
no stability. It's completely unstable.
interesting.
So yeah, it is. They want closeness and intimacy, but they have trust issues. So that one sounds fun.
I don't. I mean, yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah.
Some of these things definitely I can relate to or identify with, but others definitely not in that particular box.
Yeah. Okay. But we're not
Yeah,
getting to
yeah,
that
yeah,
yet.
yeah.
Okay. Because we'll get to narcissism another time. Okay. So then there's secure attachment, and they are just doing awesome. They are comfortable with intimacy. They don't have trust issues. Um, they have no problem with conflict. They have no problem with emotions, with commitment. They're just great. They can manage their own emotions. Um, you know, they can depend on their partners and have no problem with their partners depending on them. And they can thrive in a relationship, or they can thrive alone.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't need a relationship, but then when they have one, they do great.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just secure attached people. They have a positive view of themselves and they have a positive view of others. So they just are doing great in life and in their relationships. And they, like I said, they can regulate their emotions, and they can help their partner regulate their emotions. So they can regulate their own emotions and they can help their partner regulate their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and from what I researched, that's the smallest percentage of people
Yeah,
securely
yeah,
attached.
yeah.
And that makes sense because you think about it, right? You're looking at Gen X and millennials, which were raised by boomers. So I don't know how Gen Z's coming. Gen Z's raised by Gen X. I would be curious how many Gen Zs, if they're going to raise the percentage of secure attachment statistics, because Gen X in general has put so much time and effort into parenting their children, being present, giving them the childhood that they always wanted, being the person that they needed when they were children, kind of being helicopter parents or fully being helicopter parents. But because of the way Gen X raised Gen Z, I will be really curious to see if Gen Z comes out as more securely attached in their
Mhm.
relationships. I don't
Mhm.
know, but it makes sense that they're the lowest percentage right now in what's been studied because they're probably studying Gen X and millennial people more than the young
Yeah, yeah,
group, you know?
yeah,
So, and if you think about where we came from and how it all starts in your childhood,
yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah,
So, so that's the general overview. And like you said, it's a spectrum.
yeah,
And it ebbs and flows depending on what's going on in your life.
yeah.
So now we'll get personal.
Mhm.
And I'll start with myself. I think I 100% spent at least the first 30 years of my life as an anxiously attached person. I think that when I had a huge fear of
I don't know.
abandonment. I feel like I did.
Well, and I'm gonna get in trouble for, um, cutting you off, but I don't think when you look at these, infographics, I don't think you fall into that category as a parent.
No, no,
And
no.
this is
Yeah.
the interesting, but 30 years, you've been a parent for longer than, well, right? Yeah, we had kids before 30
I was
years.
26.
Yeah. And I don't think, and if you think about your own background, right? And I want to take it in a different direction, but you probably healed. You've talked about it. You healed once you had our Nathan, our first, right?
Yes.
And that probably cured some of that anxious attachment you felt you had, because one of the signs of an anxiously attached parent style would be parents tend to over involve the child in their own feelings and emotional needs. These parents usually worry about their caregiving performance, which may lead to frustration, and high expectations can cause conflict with the child. That's not happening,
No.
not at all. But the secure parenting, capable of regulating their emotions, they create compassionate environment for their child, and they view their child as a separate person, but they also empathize with his or her experiences.
Mm.
That
Mm-hmm.
sums up your parenting style extremely well,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. So
So
that
it's
makes
very
sense.
interesting.
Yeah. So, I wonder if you can be secure because if you can ebb into like how I said it changes throughout
Yeah,
your
yeah,
life. So I transitioned into I was going to say then I believe
yeah,
I transitioned into securely attached,
yep,
but that was based on life experience, not childhood obviously. So yeah, I had Nathan at 26 cuz I was still anxiously attached when we got married at 23. I was
yeah,
still
yeah, yeah.
struggling. I was struggling with trusting that
Mm-hmm.
the marriage was going to last. I still thought at any point you could leave.
Yep.
Um, and I honestly, and I've said this before, so that's why I said till 30. I probably didn't fully trust that you weren't going to leave for the first till we hit our 10-year mark. I think it took me 10 years of our marriage before I truly in my bones was like, okay, so we're doing this.
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, I
Like
think, I mean,
you're not leaving, you
yeah,
know?
it's funny you say that. That's sort of the genesis of our name, Gen X adulting, is all of a sudden we're fucking adults,
Yeah.
right? So it's like life's happening while you're busy making other plans. And to your point, it's like, all right, there goes 10 years. It might have been longer, might have been less.
No, I no, I kind of remember when it happened,
The epiphany.
like it was around the time my dad died.
Hmm.
So and that it wasn't connected. I just remember around that time is when shortly probably within a year after that is when I realized, okay, so you aren't going anywhere. Like you're in this type of thing.
Hmm.
So and not that marriage is easy, not that our marriage has always been easy. We've gone through ups and downs together. But I think it took those 10 years because I was coming from such trauma, such an unstable background, such abandonment issues. Like every boyfriend I didn't have a lot of boyfriends. I had long-term boyfriends. So I had my high school boyfriend, I had my college boyfriend.
Hmm.
And so, but I had huge abandonment issues in those relationships. I feel bad for those guys, even though, I love them very much and we had a lot of fun together, but they also had to deal with my abandonment issues. And
Hmm.
so, as a teenager,
I did too.
and then you did,
Yeah.
right? And so, but what's interesting, so I think as I ebbed into secure attachment as a parent,
Hmm.
so I became a securely attached person when I became a mother because that's who my children needed.
Yep.
And I was not going to project my issues onto my children. I was
Mhm.
determined not to do that. And I think that's very Gen X. I think that's very Gen X. We're very conscious and self-aware
Try to stop the
of what,
cycle
oh
in a
yeah,
way.
try to break that cycle.
Yeah.
So I think I became securely attached as a parent, but I think it took me longer in our marriage and our relationship for me to transition to a securely attached partner, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Mhm.
I was almost riding two different attachment styles through my 20s into my early 30s. And then I think they blended into, they solidified into secure attachment in my 30s.
Mhm.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does, and that's where, you know, when I say this is on a spectrum, when I'm reading through some of this stuff, and I've read through it for the couple days now, and then we're gonna talk about this. I've looked into this, and it's been thinking about it. The spectrum is not only over time from when you're a child to when you're, say, in your teens, your early adulthood, your early midlife 30s, whatever. It changes over time.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating, and I'm curious if you can relate to this, is it changes too by the relationship. So you're absolutely securely attached to your kids. I would say you're probably securely attached to me at this point.
Yes.
Um, you're probably securely attached to your mom at
Yes.
this point. But then if you think about other relationships, they fall, I bet some of them fall on different slides here, as different parts of the spectrum.
Yes.
Right. So that's the fascinating thing that I'm finding here is that, because I was thinking going in, I'm an avoidant, but I came from a securely attached environment. So it's
Mhm.
got me thinking, okay, when did I get kind of screwed up here?
Right.
Because I was secure. Now I'm tend to be avoidant,
Okay,
but
so yeah,
I
going
don't,
into
I'm
you.
not taking it to me
No,
quite
no.
yet, but I'm giving you an example to maybe reflect back on, because with our kids, I'm definitely in the secure space,
Yeah.
but there's also some avoidant where I don't totally honor all of their emotions and feelings, right? But at the same time I do, but I'm not as quick to do it as you. So it's fascinating to me that
Yes.
this is and this is psychology, right? That's
Yes.
where this stuff comes from. Psychologists wrote up these different buckets and to describe behavior, and it's never a perfect science, right? It's a social science, and it's not a whack or criticism of psychology. It's you're dealing with the mind and emotions and behaviors. Um, but I'm going to turn it back to you. I was just kind of giving you that framework that I've been mulling on, as far as how it applies to different things,
It applies to
different areas
it,
of your life.
it applies to different relationships.
Yeah.
It can apply to, absolutely. I would say that, at least coming from someone who was anxiously attached because of childhood,
Mhm.
probably the people that were in my childhood,
Mhm.
I only am securely attached with the ones that I unpack trauma with.
What does that mean?
So, like, my mom and I have gone
Yes.
through
Yes.
a lot of work together.
Mhm.
My mom has been incredibly gracious in allowing me to heal my childhood trauma, that she was involved in some of it,
Mhm.
not intentionally in any way. My mom's entire desire was just to try to give
Yeah.
me a normal childhood, all right?
Yep.
But so she, I know it's was painful for her to rehash things and to have to hear things that happened to me or how I felt about things at the time.
Mhm.
Very painful. And especially, I'm a mother, I can only imagine. But she gave me that space. She gave me the space
Mhm.
to listen to what I needed to unpack so that I could heal, as much as it probably hurt her at the time to have to go through it again or to
Mhm.
even learn certain things she didn't know happened.
Mhm.
But as a result of her giving me that space, I was able to then be completely healed and securely attached to one of the like the main caregiver
Mhm.
of my childhood. Not that I wasn't securely attached to her in my childhood. I never doubted my mom's love
Yeah,
or
yeah.
commitment, but it was more, I guess, more of an authentic secure attachment,
Yeah.
not a secure attachment because oh my God, I have to hold on to you. You're the only stable thing in my childhood.
Yeah.
But just coming from a very positive, secure attachment. The secure attachment changed
Yeah.
from survival to an authentic, positive, secure attachment.
Yep.
And as a result, we have a really great relationship. She lives with us. The
Yeah.
only way that could happen is if we had gone through, if I was able to go through this, where it's an enjoyable living experience, right? Because there's a lot
Is it
of
enjoyable? No, just kidding.
there's a lot of Gen Xers who are now faced with having to care for their elderly parents,
Mhm.
and they have not unpacked their trauma from those parents or from their childhood. And some of those parents were either neglectful or abusive, mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever, um, or unintentionally caused trauma. And these people, these Gen Xers, have not had a chance to resolve any of that and are now being forced to care for these people and in their parents. And so, and a lot of times it rehashes all this trauma for them, but they can't do anything with it because the parents aren't at the point anymore where it can be resolved, or
Yeah.
the parents
Yeah.
won't create that space for
Yeah.
them. So that's a tough one because a lot of Gen Xers are going through wanting to resolve past trauma,
Mhm.
but at the same time are being forced to care for their abusers or
Yeah.
the people that unintentionally caused that trauma.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, what I was thinking about even for your own self, you look at my upbringing and your upbringing. We've talked about that. I was
Yeah.
stable, 2 parents,
Mhm.
2.5 dogs, whatever, all that. You're moving. You've got, your life was quote unquote crazy, right? I have to all blank this out. It's kind of fucked up
Right.
compared to mine, right?
Yeah.
But your mom was the one consistent,
Yes.
and she always provided you with love, and always, you probably doubted some of her decision making and actions she took, but at the end of the day, you knew she loved you, and that's evolved into your adulthood. I do think that's probably why you're able to be a securely attached mom. Probably, maybe, maybe
Yes.
not. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's probably, it's helped you at least do better, right? You want to be better,
Right.
and you're smart enough, and you've done enough self introspection to say, I want to be better, but I don't want to go too far. I don't
Right.
want to make my kids are not my healing vessel,
Right.
right? So I think that's good. But I think your mom provided a crazy upbringing, but over time it became secure, like you described. But also, partly because you guys were able to talk through it. She was on the podcast. We hit some sensitive topics that were probably, rehashing some old wounds for both of you guys. But what I find interesting about this is, and this is what I mean about the spectrum of fluidity of all of this, with everything I just said, there are still times where she triggers you,
Mm.
and you go back to
Mhm.
one of these other boxes, right?
Right.
You're leaving that secure box,
Yes.
and you're going into the something.
Yes.
I don't know whether it's
And it's
disorganized or whatever it might be.
yeah.
It's just that's why I find this fascinating. This topic fascinating.
And it doesn't happen a lot, and it's
Mm-mm.
completely unintentional on her part.
Yeah,
You know, when I'm triggered,
it's startling for you.
when I'm triggered, it's completely unintentional on her part, but it's almost like you're humming along and then something happens and it brings you right back to that emotion
Yeah.
you were feeling at that time, that chaos.
Like the gut punch.
Yeah, and you're like, now I actually, thankfully, in general, I find humor in a lot of that now. Yeah,
Mhm.
I am able to laugh about it, but there are times where I'm like, oh my God, and I
Mhm.
have to have my moment, but it's really my moment. It doesn't really even have anything to do with her. It's just her action triggered it, but
Yeah,
again,
it's a trigger.
it's a trigger,
Yeah.
right? But it's really still, it's just bringing, it triggers that and it's resolved. That's the thing. But even resolved crap can still show itself.
Oh yeah.
And that's what catches you off guard. If you're someone that comes from childhood trauma or abuse, and which I guess that's redundant, but all childhood trauma does not mean abuse is present.
Mhm.
And you've unpacked and you've resolved and you found closure with whoever you need to find closure with.
Mhm.
Um, and then something happens that triggers you and brings you right back, it's startling
Mhm.
because you really are functioning as a securely attached person,
Mhm.
as a healed person, um, as a high functioning, you know, person. You're
Yeah.
doing well.
Yeah.
And then it brings you back so hard that it reminds you how you stood on no ground and how chaotic
Yeah.
you were inside, the chaos that was inside of you, and how reactionary you were to things and how much pain you were in. It brings you back like a light switch.
Mhm.
And that can be startling to your nervous system when you've been living in a healthy way,
Mhm.
and you got yourself out of fight or flight, and then that triggers you right, your nervous system right back in, and you're like, oh my god.
Mhm.
There's been time when that has happened to me, and it's not just like, okay, so we did mention my mom, like
Mhm.
there was like maybe at different times that's happened, but there's other people in my life that
Yeah, no,
also
yeah.
do that.
Yep.
And when that happens, it's like it's a shock to the system, and it makes you realize, though, the positive of that is it really makes you realize how far you've come and how healed you are,
Mhm.
and how you're not even that person anymore. And it actually, I always feel bad for that person. I immediately have some empathy, and I'm like, wow, that's how that person felt. That person I was felt like that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with no break, and how much pain I was sustaining.
Mhm.
It just, but this all happens in like 30 seconds. Yeah, it can all that stuff, everything I just said, you could feel it all in 30 seconds.
Yeah, like a flash in the pan.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
shock to the system.
Yeah.
So, but to go back to securely attached. So, yeah, like with my mom, I'm completely securely attached with you, with the kids. But there's relatives from my childhood
Mhm.
that there are things not resolved. And so I'm definitely not anxiously attached to them. I might be avoidant. I'm not attached to
You know,
them at all.
it I'm gonna, I'll open back up my thing here because there's gotta be an ambivalence. Where does ambivalence fall into this?
I
Would
see, yeah,
that,
because it would seem
you
like
know
avoidant.
Yeah.
It would seem like avoidant. I probably go into avoidant when it comes to certain people in my life. Um, I don't know. I don't know if it's even an attachment style, if it's just,
I didn't see it jump up. That's why I'm going back real quick. These are great bullet points. I don't see an ambivalence section here.
I feel like avoidant is kind of a synonym to that a little bit. But
Somewhat. Yeah.
I will say this, there are some people still in my life that have at times triggered my anxious attachment. And I'm going to be honest, it's really been until this year where I have made the conscious decision where I've really realized, wow, I'm being anxiously attached about this.
Yeah.
And I made the conscious decision to stop.
Mhm.
I'm like, these people don't deserve my anxious attachment.
Mhm.
What am I doing? And it's almost like they trigger feelings that people in my childhood triggered in me. And when you're an anxiously attached child, you're constantly trying to get approval from the people in your life that won't give you the approval. They're because that's what's causing the trauma in the childhood,
Mhm.
right? So you're just constantly trying to please love me, please accept me, please choose me, please
Mhm.
make me a priority. Um, please approve.
Mhm.
And so I realized this year there's some people in my life that have triggered that. And I've spent a lot of my life trying to being anxiously attached, trying to, all those things. Please accept me. Please love me. Please, uh, choose me. Please make me a priority.
Mhm.
And this year I was like, I don't know, it just slapped me in the face. Like, what? So even if you unpack, even if you have self awareness, and I'm not, it's always work. You're always a work, especially if you come from a background like mine. You're always working. But even if you really are on top of the world and you're like, I'm doing great. Like you don't even think about it because you're functioning so well. But there, you'll still find those skeletons in your closet. You still have to acknowledge them. I'm still unpacking trauma because when I say recently, it's probably in the last 6 months, I was like, oh my God, I'm anxiously attached about this. Stop that.
Yeah.
Stop that. Even if I have to go into avoidant about these people. Yeah,
What do you think is that's a level of consciousness that allows you to recognize that, right? Acknowledge, recognize that I've got this unhealthy behavior with this thing. It can be a probably a thing, a person, whatever, right? What do you think? What's happened there?
because there's been things done or said that triggered me into feeling exactly the same way I did when I was a child, and I finally correlated it.
But that's what I mean. How did you come to that correlation? Would you say, or that understanding? Is it just we're getting old and maturing, and there's some genetic thing happening with us, or
I just kept questioning myself, why, what is this? Why do you care?
yeah,
And I
yeah,
kept trying to get to the root of it. Why do you care? Because these people have they should have not this much control over how you're feeling. Why do you care? And then I just thought about it and thought about it. And I finally was like, oh my God, this is how I always felt with these other people that were in my childhood.
hmm,
It's the same thing. And there's the people in my childhood that made me feel this way have very similar characteristics to the people that are currently in my life. They're making me feel this way.
hmm,
Or you could reverse that. The people that are currently in my life that made me feel this way have some very similar characteristics to the people in my childhood that made me
hmm,
feel that way.
hmm,
I recognized the connection.
yeah, yeah.
I just did. I just recognized the connection.
Probably just the maturity thing.
Yeah, yeah. And then I was like, okay, now that I see it, once you see it, you're like, oh, and it takes away all the power.
Yeah, yeah,
Like they don't have power anymore.
yeah.
So now I'm like, and it's amazing because then you don't realize how much energy, how much thought
Yep.
and emotion you've been putting into certain people until you finally see reality. And then you get that time and energy back and you're like, oh my God, wow. You didn't realize how much
Yeah,
energy you were putting into it.
yeah. They're in your
So
head.
yeah, but I would say overall, securely attached. I don't think I have any more anxious attachment. I think that was the last of my anxious attachment. And it's probably because again, those people triggered the same stuff that was triggered in my childhood. And I didn't realize it was going on.
Hmm,
And that also is interesting to me is how did I not see that?
hmm,
But I think I was just, again, so busy living my life, raising my children, and finally it got to the point where I had to face it. And I was like, what is this? What is going on? Because it
hmm,
was just so unusual. So I led to and have settled into secure attachment,
yeah,
and I could say I feel like I finally am there, even with friends.
yeah,
I'm very choosy about the friends I give my time to.
yep,
Um, and it's totally secure attachment.
yeah,
I've never been anxiously attached to friends. Actually, even when I was a kid, I was never a big anxious. It's so weird. With boys, I was,
hmm.
but well,
Dad
no,
issues.
in middle school, elementary school, middle school, I was anxiously attached about girlfriends. And then in high school is when I started getting securely attached to my girlfriends in my life. And then in college. So elementary school, middle school, highly anxiously attached,
Hmm,
trying. And then I think I just met the right people, the right girls in
yeah,
high school and college,
hmm,
I also had a boyfriend,
hmm,
so, and he got a lot of my energy and time. If I could go back, I would be single, 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 but I was trying to fulfill those abandonment issues. So
hmm,
you can't, yeah, I understand why I had the boyfriend, but, um, I, I remember always wondering how my friends could be single and not have a boyfriend and be just fine. It didn't make any sense to me, but that goes back to that abandonment.
hmm,
So anyways, that's where I'm at now. But with you, I find it very interesting because as you said, you came from a very well, I mean, we shouldn't say typical childhood because there's a lot of people who had trauma in typical homes.
hmm,
So just because you have two parents and you live in what seems like a normal childhood,
hmm,
there's a lot of abuse that goes on in those homes too.
hmm.
It doesn't mean that everything's great. But in your situation, that's not the case.
Yeah,
Right. So, but I don't want to say like, oh, if you have divorced
yeah,
parents, you automatically have trauma. And if you have married parents, you automatically don't.
yeah,
Absolutely not the case,
yeah.
you know. But you start out, I'd say, secure attached, right?
Yeah, I think I did, and I've even thought about it because I'm not going to go too into it, but you know, as a kid, I was brought to my aunt's house and and left with relatives. My um spent a lot of time under the care of other relatives,
Mm-hmm.
and but I was thinking, I'm like, there's got to be something bad. There's got to be, right? Everybody has some weird shit, and it's like I didn't really have any bad experiences with any of those people taking care of me and stuff,
Right.
right? So I
Do you
would
think that you had any, though, issues with the fact that your parents weren't there because you were having to spend time with these other relatives and your parents weren't able to be there during those years? I'm not saying in your whole childhood,
yeah,
during those years where your parents had to give their attention to your sibling.
yeah,
And so as a result, you spent your a lot of formative years with your different aunts
yep,
and uncles and
yep,
cousins, which
yep,
was all positive.
yep.
But if you look at it from the outside, um, do you think that during those formative years that had any effect on your attachment, that your parents weren't there during that time, or no?
I don't think so, and I would love to find a nugget, but I've not been able to find one because I can't think of it because everybody made it okay.
Yeah.
Everyone made it okay,
Yeah.
and you know, which is great.
No, it is. It means
But
there was a strong village there.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So it was all, even in that situation,
yeah,
it was, you were able to still have a healthy environment and have a secure attachment
yeah.
to the, because it says to the caregivers, it's related, the attachment
It is.
style
Yeah,
is related to the experiences with the caregivers in your life. It doesn't
yeah,
say parents.
yep.
So during those years, because what age would you say we're talking for those years of you?
Gosh, I don't even know. Is my earliest memories.
Okay,
You know.
so let's say 3, 4, like probably like little,
Yeah, yeah. I
up
would assume
until
so.
10, 12, like 10 years of your life?
It maybe, maybe. Maybe I honestly don't know because it's, and I don't think I'm blocking it out per se. I almost have to go back because you know, going from little kid, then I played sports, and that became my focus, and it was in school, and there was no.
Okay, so when you think back on your childhood is the spending time with your aunts and uncles,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a block.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next block is sports.
No, I don't know if I'd go there. I mean, I'm not. No, no. I mean, we lived in one house and moved to another house. We were a family unit. We'd get in the car, the four of us, and go drive to relatives in the next town over or the same town. There were family parties we'd all go to. We'd ride home together in the car. We would make trips to West Virginia. I would spend time there with family.
Yeah.
So no, no, I mean, that's all a big continuum, right?
So then this part where you're talking about where you spent most of your time with your aunts and uncles, were those experiences you just talked about intermixed with that time?
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So it was like there were times when you were only with your aunts and uncles, and then there was normal family time.
100%. Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And to your point, that's the caregiver part of it.
Yes.
When I was with my nuclear family, the four of us and our dog,
Right.
right? Everything's fine. When my parents needed to tend to my sister, really, and um, I would be at one of my aunt's house,
Right.
and everything there was fine.
Right.
Truly was.
Right.
I
Right.
would
Right. Yeah.
love to find something because
Well,
it
no,
doesn't. It
it
seems uncanny that,
there
but
are
that's
people
how
that
it is.
that are securely attached
Yeah,
that did not have trauma in their childhood.
yeah,
Um, but what would you say, like, because you're a Gen X man, right? And
yep.
we touched on this briefly in an episode.
Hmm.
Um, and it's funny because we had some Gen X women come in and say they they were treated the same way. But would you say that your emotional maturity in general was um given the attention it should have during your formative years, so that you would be able, so that your emotional intelligence could grow and evolve to where it should be by the time you were an adult?
I would probably say no, but I think that feels more generational to me.
That's what I'm talking
Yeah,
about, though.
yeah, yeah,
I'm asking you this not to put the blame on anyone.
yeah, yeah.
I'm
I'm not
saying,
defending anyone either.
okay,
No.
okay. I'm just saying generationally, as a Gen X guy, would you say that that part of your personality was what's the right word? Shushed.
I feel like that's a generational thing, probably, yeah.
Right.
Right, we talked about this where it wasn't cool to cry per se,
Right.
but it was fine to be angry, or it
Right.
was fine to probably get in a fight. Oh, boys will be boys, they'll fight,
Right.
right? So sure, I don't, yeah, I wouldn't say that my generation it was not facilitated to, to explore your emotional side nor your emotional intelligence, if that's what you're asking me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
So as a result of this generation, not everyone, I'm sure there are many healthy men, Gen X men whose parents were of a different sort and actually like were in touch with their son's emotions and helped them understand their emotions and identify their emotions and express their emotions and all that. But in general, and again, this could happen to Gen X women too, but I'm talking about Gen X men. Would you say that as a result of that, a lot of Gen X men maybe ended up to be avoidant or fearful avoidance?
Um, Potentially. And so I'll take it a different direction. You're asking somewhat of a very specific question, right? I've gone more the route of looking at these boxes and thinking, okay, I'm I really was a securely attached person. Um, Truly was. But as I've gone throughout life, I've definitely have levels of mistrust across the broad spectrum of things. I don't trust public institutions. I don't trust um, groups of people. I don't trust groupthink. I don't trust certain people, right? So I have mistrust. Um, but I think that's all natural and it could be explained. I definitely avoid certain situations. I don't like to get into conflict, but I'm not afraid of it, as you know, right? I'm fine with conflict depending on what the conflict's for and what it's all about, right? The lady speeding yesterday, me saying slow down, that's conflict. I'm not afraid of that. Um, you get into, you have I have two sons and a daughter, right? And boy, I've learned a lot just by having to be their parent, be their dad, right? Their caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
So they've certainly brought out a more emotional, softer side of me than probably what would have been facilitated naturally as my upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially a daughter. But at the same time, having two boys, there's an age difference there. I've definitely was more of a Gen X dad towards our older one
Yeah.
than our second one. So I've
Mm-hmm.
certainly evolved, right? And that's sort of that spectrum of things. Am I answering your question here?
You definitely uh gave our younger son more grace than our older son.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um so you answered it on the broad spectrum of how things in society affect you
Yeah.
and as a parent.
Yep.
How would you say not having how would you say though
I got to avoid this. Come on.
you're avoiding. How
Yeah.
would you say your emotional intelligence development affected your interpersonal relationships, like your marriage?
What do you mean?
So do you think, see, because we see that there seems to be a lot of conflict between
Hmm.
men and women from the feedback we're getting, and a lot of the age of the men and women are Gen X, and there's a lot of butting heads. Like the women feel like they have been um, used for labor,
Mhm.
used for sex,
Mhm.
used for being a mother to these men's children.
Mhm.
And the men feel that the women have used them for money
Mhm.
and to do things around the house, basically.
Mhm.
So neither side feels appreciated,
Mhm.
obviously.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering how much that ties back to the stunting of the emotional intelligence of Gen X men and Gen X women in certain situations.
Mhm.
But I'm going to speak about Gen X men. Um, by their emotional intelligence, no one talked about anxiety. No one talked about social anxiety. No one talked about feeling overwhelmed. You're feeling overwhelmed right now.
Yeah.
No one helped Gen X men when they were children identify what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And so it ends up going to anger.
Yeah.
Because if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling
Yep.
overwhelmed, if you're feeling sad,
Mhm.
and it's not being dealt with or you're not being guided on how to cope with it, it ends up settling into anger. So then as you become an adult and you get into a relationship with a woman and you might be she may be trying to express something like, I need this, or could you do this, or I'm feeling this way.
Mhm.
They're feeling overwhelmed. They don't feel equipped. They're feeling defensive. I'm failing in some way because she's coming to me needing something. I'm obviously not meeting that need. I don't understand exactly what she needs. I'm defensive because I cannot meet this need, I don't think.
Mhm.
I'm feeling overwhelmed. I have anxiety. It's going to turn to anger. Avoid.
Mhm.
It's a breakdown in the marriage, right? And that builds resentment. Then the woman doesn't feel heard. She feels pushed aside, that her feelings aren't valid. Um that what she is bringing to him
Mhm.
is not being honored or acknowledged and doesn't matter to him.
Mhm.
But that's not necessarily where he's coming from. He's
Mhm.
just not equipped and to handle it because nobody taught him how to recognize what emotions he's
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if the stunting of the emotional intelligence of Gen X men, and I'm only speaking about Gen X men because
Yeah.
that's my
Yeah.
generation. I'm
Yeah.
sure boomer men also have gone through this, but Gen X talks about stuff. Um, so I'm wondering how that's played into the breakdown of relationships and marriages and why you're seeing such vitriol when it comes to
Yeah.
right now, how they're talking about each other.
Yeah.
Um, and so that brings me back to my point.
Yeah.
Did you think that your emotional intelligence was fostered in a productive way to prepare you to be in a marriage?
I'm going to avoid that direct question because I think you've just said a ton,
Yeah.
right? You really did say a lot. I'm I'm surprised at the vitriol as well. Um, I'm in the camp of if I'm scrolling and I see something that you don't have to comment on everything.
Yeah.
And you can refrain from attacking other people, especially people you don't know. Right. So I'm shocked at the response of women sorting things out for the first time in certain cases, right? And celebrating it. I think that's great. I'm believe it or not, I'm a huge fan and advocate of women and women's rights and everything. And, and maybe having a daughter allowed, really pushed me there to on an emotional intelligence level.
Right.
But I'm 100%. I think it's great. I think it's great because we've talked a lot about it. The Gen X women are really the ones it feels like are discovering this. But as we've talked about, the generation of women behind us are probably much stronger right off the rip,
Yeah.
right? Which is great. I think it's great. It's a human evolutionary thing. I think it's wonderful. Um, the one thing that's interesting to me though, and we've joked about this, but you kind of summed up maybe our lives or marriage or maybe arguments we've had, right? It definitely hits home, and I'm not perfect. Um, but the emotional intelligence. I've said this before, and you're like, whatever, or what, where I say, I know everything, or I feel everything, right? I feel everything. That's, and I do, I don't know if I feel everything. I certainly don't know everything, but I feel a lot. And sure, it's overwhelming, I think. And I think I probably am representative of my generation. The world's fucking crazy, and we're living within it, and we're trying to provide for our family within it. And we're trying to interact with people we care with, and, you know, and not be assholes. And so it's a lot. And we probably didn't, but who does? Who gets, how do you get equipped to deal with all of this stuff? And unless you talk about it, right? But it wasn't, you don't talk about this in our generation. And I think, yeah, maybe I'm making your point, but it blows me away that, like, you know, like Nathan and his buddies will talk about certain things. And my buddies and I, we don't really talk about stuff. You'd be like, hey, you okay? I'm good. All right, cool. Let's go get a beer. You know, that kind of thing.
Right.
So maybe I'm making your point, and it's probably not that you're making a point. It's a question. It's an
That
observation.
you didn't answer. Do you think that the emotional intelligence, the lack of acknowledging and honoring and supporting your your emotional intelligence growth affected how you approach some things in marriage? Do you think that if things would have been, and again, this is not blaming anyone, this is a generational thing. Do you think that if your emotional intelligence would have been given as much attention as your athletic performance or your academic performance or your expectations as a son, as a brother, as a friend, if your emotional intelligence would have been acknowledged as much as those things, then you would have been more
Uh,
equipped in an interpersonal relationship with a woman.
of course, but that wasn't happening. And
Right.
it took that to not happen, and the world to evolve for us to be able to do that with our kids.
Right.
Because I absolutely feel like I do that with my kids.
Yes.
And it's, but I have a psych degree. And so I kind of have an affinity to this, right? I kind of got into that stuff. I'm, you know, Freud and Jung and Skinner and Pavlov and all these different behavioralists and stuff like that. So I learned about that out of interest. And um
But then again, that's still an external thing. You can learn about that intellectually
mhm,
and even sometimes maybe apply it to yourself.
mhm.
But when it comes to a relationship, um, I do you think that you've been more avoidant, and men in general your age may be more avoidant when it comes to conflict within their interpersonal relationship, their marriage, because they're not equipped to handle it.
Yeah, I don't know if they're it's a fascinating question. Just to go back and put a bow on that last statement, though, the reason I'm able to do it with our kids is because of you as well. And you setting you're very good at that. And you've educated me on how to communicate with them, and when to not be an asshole, probably, or right, or not to push, but to step back
Space,
and create
space.
space. Listen, um, maybe they're going through this. So you get a ton of credit for that. I'll give myself some credit for following it, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but I think when it comes to, you know, men, it's fascinating because we've talked about this. You fall into roles,
Yeah.
and the roles get probably deeper and deeper the further you go along without any course correction, right?
Mhm.
And so at the end of the day, I think for my generation, we just don't feel like dealing with a fucking argument. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't want to fight about this. So I'm just gonna go out in the garage and putz around or
Avo
whatever,
and
right?
that's an avoidant, right?
It's 100% avoidant, but it's also to maintain peace and harmony. There's a strategy behind avoidance. And
Okay.
it's
Okay, so
right, it's not the
you
worst
just
thing.
brought up an interesting thing because it is the worst thing. And because it only brings peace
Temporary
and
peace,
to
temporary
you,
peace
to you,
is not the worst
to the
thing.
man. Not I'm not going to say to you, To the man, it does. Because
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you, when a man has that attitude of, I don't want to have this argument right now. I don't want to talk about this right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out in the garage. And a
Yeah.
man thinks he's diffusing the situation. All that's happened there, I'm educating men right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Mark my words. You have lit a match. And she was at level 5, but you walking away and saying you're not talking about it right now. And
Well,
I'm
yeah.
speaking to men. I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to men because I'm not making this like a personal thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now she's level 10 because she feels that she feels invalidated. She feels that the man doesn't care about her feelings, about what she brought to him. She feels undermined and belittled,
Mhm.
and the resentment, that is the planting the seeds of resentment. And every time, it also creates distrust, because every time a woman comes to a man with something that is hurting her or bothering her, she is trusting him with that vulnerable part of her heart. I'm going to take a chance and share with you what is hurting me or what is bothering me. I trust you enough to bring that to you. And when he's like, I can't talk about that right now. I don't want to get in this argument. We're not doing this. She literally feels like he stepped on her heart, right?
Mhm.
Like that he's like, I don't care about you and how you feel.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's how it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm saying that's how she feels.
Yeah.
And so you do that enough, the seeds of resentment grow and build a freaking wall.
But
And also, she will stop trusting you. She will stop bringing things to you. And then you get divorced. This is how it
yeah,
happens.
no, it's fascinating because honestly, what you just described to a male of my generation, I will represent us,
Yeah.
very dramatic. We did not step on your heart. We did not step on your emotions. There's just something going on. And here's where it's problematic. I'll give you this. If that becomes the norm, then that's not okay, right? If this happens 10 times and 9 out of 10 times, it's like I'm going to the garage or whatever, the
That's what I'm
proverbial garage.
saying.
9 at 90% of the time is not good. If there's some ratio in between there, that right, it's got to work for everybody, right? These are dynamic situations. It's a relationship. It's two people.
Of
And
course.
so it can't be 90% of the time you're like, all right, let's talk. And how are you? Tell me everything that's going wrong. Let me make it, let me just listen. All right.
Why
But
not?
because it's a lot. It's a lot.
Okay, so but that brings me back to the emotional intelligence of Gen X men, because I think it feels like it's a lot
Yeah.
because Gen X men were not equipped with how to deal with emotions. And
But
so their first emotion with that is feeling overwhelmed, feeling ill-equipped, feeling anxious, and it's a lot. I can't handle this. I don't think they're feeling I don't love you. I don't think they're feeling I want to hurt you. I think that they are like, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to avoid this and hope that she'll just like settle down and simmer down.
yeah.
And then life will just kind of get back to normal and we'll just start being normal again. And what they don't realize is that, sure, she seems normal, but dude, no, it's damaging, and it's over and over again. And eventually the relationship is damaged beyond repair.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think the behavior of Gen X women is similar or comparable to these younger generation of women? Meaning, we've talked about emotional capabilities of younger men. It feels like younger women have similarly advanced development of their own emotional control, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see where I'm going here?
Advanced development of their emotional control.
Compared to a Gen X woman. So
Mm.
here's where I'm going. um, what makes you think you girls are not a lot? And from a Gen X guy, you're saying it's the Gen X man is ill-equipped to deal with this. Why do we need to be equipped to deal with it? And again, I'm asking
No, I
for the masses,
understand
right?
for the
I'm
right.
not
Yeah, okay. So, because it's not complicated stuff, right? Okay, so when people get, let's say they're getting married, I'm gonna bring marriage into this. I know not everyone gets married, but let's say they get married, right? And so back for Gen Xers, no one ever talked about roles. No one ever talked about a man helping on the domestic front. That was not talked about. What was talked about is a woman should go to work, a woman should have children, a woman should raise those children, a woman should cook dinner, do the laundry, clean the house, plan everything, all the doctor's appointments, drive everyone everywhere, basically do everything. The man goes to work, the man takes care of the lawn and all the leaves and the gutters and all that stuff, right? So that is how Gen X was sold. Men and boys and girls were sold that. You boys were sold that, and us girls were sold that, right?
mhm,
Now, in there, no one acknowledged emotional intelligence at all, even in the girls. And then the emotional development of both Gen X boys and Gen X girls was not acknowledged on either front, right?
mhm,
So we just were kind of like, we're all those things Gen X went through, but
yep,
let's just focus on emotional development. That was not acknowledged really in general, in general. So then we grow up and we marry each other.
mhm,
And in our minds, we have two different ideas of how things are going to go, right? Us Gen X girls think, of course, a woman can do everything because that's what we see on TV and those are the commercials and the TV shows. And we see our moms and our aunts working, sometimes our grandmas, single moms, married moms. Everyone seems to be fine. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do it all. And then the men are like, yeah, that she's going to do it all. And I'm going to go to work and take care of things around the house. And no emotional development happened, right? So then as the women are humming along doing 90% of the domestic load, in addition to working a full-time job and handling same stuff that men are handling at their job. I'm not saying literally the same, but the same pressures.
why is it different? It's the same shit. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
it
same.
is.
So handling the same stuff, 40 hours a week,
Mhm,
give or take, whatever. And the second job of the domestic load and the children. A human being can't handle that emotionally and mentally. They get burnout. They become disconnected. They go into fight or flight. They go into autopilot because it's a grind that never ends because you never get a break. Women were not coming home from work, sitting on a couch, turning on the TV and chilling while someone's making dinner in the kitchen. The men were. The children were not going to the men asking for help on this, help on that. The mothers, the soul. This is how it ended up for us as Gen Xers, right? So then she comes to him and she's like, I'm upset about this, or I need this, or can we talk about this? And it could be the smallest thing, like, I can't handle, I need the bathrooms cleaned, or I need you to take me out on a date, or I need you to help Jimmy with his homework. It could be anything, right? She's asking for help. And she's probably been grinding so long that by the time she comes to him, she's at her wit's end. So there's a chance it could be coming intently in an intense way. Like,
mhm,
dude, whatever, I need help.
mhm.
Because his emotional development wasn't acknowledged, he's feeling completely overwhelmed with this reaction. He feels defensive. He feels like she's saying he's doing something wrong. He thinks she's acting crazy. Where's this coming from? Everything's been fine. Where's this coming from? Why all of a sudden are you acting like this? We've all been fine. When really she hasn't been fine. She's been falling apart. And then he's like, I can't deal with this. I'm going to avoid. I'm going in the garage. I can't deal with this. She feels pushed aside. She feels like he's not going to help. She feels like she's invalidated. And that happens over and over and over again. And eventually the marriage falls apart when the children are young, or she hits menopause, or she
I
hits midlife and she's like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. You don't hear me. I've had done this for 30 years or 25 years, whatever. I'm going to go spend the rest of my life for myself.
yeah.
And then the men are mad.
I think what you just did is you backed into taking it off men's plates as a sole source. And what I mean by that is as you know, I'm a very much an evolutionist. in that I think the world continues to evolve and we get better and better, right? As the wheel turns. Um, and the younger generations are doing better emotionally
Yes.
than us, right? So I
Yeah.
believe that that's evolution. Um, what you just described is new or was new in that the generations before us, the in the US, I don't know elsewhere, I'll just speak for the US, but I feel like at a global, not a global level because we're the richest nation in the world, right? So I'll keep it as a US based thing. But it was typically the guy would go work, mom would stay home, and that's not even accurate too, right? But for certain parts of the
In
story,
general,
but
yes, it
yeah.
is. It is.
Um, so then all of a sudden, and that's what we grew up with modeled. That was modeled behavior for us. That's what I saw my uncles and aunts and everybody. That's what they did.
That's what you saw.
Yeah, that's what
I
I
saw
saw.
the opposite of that.
Yes. But my point is, in general, we grew up with the beavers, right? Little,
No, no. In general, we grew up as the first children of divorce.
yes, yes.
So
But that's
it
what I'm
depends
saying.
on where you
That's,
were. You had both. You had either
yeah.
Leave It to Beaver Life. We were the part of where they melded.
Yep.
Some were Leave It to Beaver Life, and some were
But
children of
you're
divorce.
kind of making my point. There was a paradigm shift at our generation. Gen X was the paradigm shift from,
Yes.
generally speaking, there wasn't divorce as much as there wasn't daycare, right? Gen X is on the forefront of divorce, daycare. You can bring home the bacon and make it too, whatever the hell it is, right? So, yeah, we didn't have that modeled behavior as men, and now all of a sudden, and you had used the word. I'll go back to it. You said women are humming along, working outside the home, taking care of the kids. They weren't humming because then you came back to the reality. They were grinding,
Yes.
grinding
Yes.
with slow. When you're grinding as hard as women would be grinding like that, it's slowly. It's not cool.
It eats away at
It
you.
eats away at your soul.
Yes.
Yes, I get it. So, but there was no preparation for this for any of us, not men or women. What's
Yes.
finally happened, I think, is maybe women they've I don't know, maybe you can explain it better, but it feels like they've had enough because they've had enough. And men, um, we were we had modeled behavior that was different. So you're coming to us now because you're grinding your it's a lot, right? You need some support. And we're like, what's wrong? Dinner. I'm just chilling. I just worked all day and gonna put on the game, that kind of thing. And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, no, so I get it, but I don't think we've been oversimplifying it, saying that it's men and emotional lack of maturity or lack of emotional development. I think you just hit it on the head, though. You guys didn't have that emotional preparation either. You were thrown into this media created environment that we all were, right? We all grew up. I grew up in the generation of like, Cosmopolitan, Playboy, thought we are all marrying models that could do it all, right? We all thought we were marrying that woman,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so, I think that's more it than I don't think it's completely picking on men that they couldn't deal with it. But what I do see, and I don't think this is a bad thing, women your age, your generation, Gen X women are saying, fuck this. We've had enough. And men are not, they're not hearing that. They're not getting ahead of that enough to prevent the nuclear option, which, is the divorce, is the pure hatred. And we see it, right? We've seen plenty of comments from men that it's like, guys, if just keep moving. You don't need to come in and attack these women. It's unnecessary.
Well, but I think also their reaction, I think women are saying we've had enough, and their reaction is indicative or an example of the whole thing. So I think women were coming to the men in their lives repeatedly saying, please, I need this. Can you hear me about this? I need you to understand this. La, 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 la. Over and over again. Push aside, push
Hmm.
aside, push aside. Avoid, avoid, avoid. The men were avoiding. And so now the women are like, okay, I'm leaving because I can't do this anymore.
Hmm.
And then the men now are having a reaction to that because they
Hmm.
didn't acknowledge any of these conversations up to this point. And so they're completely taking it personally. That's one thing I've realized is they're taking it as some sort of like, it, I don't even know if it's personal because that would mean that they're taking accountability. I it's almost like they're taking it like the woman is putting herself past her family.
It,
That's how it
yeah,
is.
yeah,
They're viewing it as she's putting her needs and her happiness past her family when she's saying, I have just spent the last 30 years giving everything I have to this family, and you never heard me when I
you know
needed
what though?
help.
And I'll say it. Again, I'm absolutely pro woman. Good, good for the women to finally put their needs above the rest of what was going on. Because at your age, your kids are probably, not every case, right? But the kids are probably got in an okay spot. You've hit this point in your life where you probably are able to spend less. We've talked about this. You're not having to cook for 5 people right now,
Right.
right? We're
I
it's
can, yes, I've been able to let go of
yeah,
some of
there's
the things
some
I
of the
was doing.
responsibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But what's unfortunate though, and I agree with you, good. And I think it's amazing and I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. But what's sad is that so many times these women that are reclaiming their energy and moving on into the next phase of their life, they're having to leave their marriage behind because their marriage was part of what was destroying them. And that's what's sad. And
Yeah.
that's where I go back to the emotional development because I feel like some of it ties back to that. If the emotional development, the emotional maturity, emotional intelligence, whatever you want to call it, if it had been dealt with and acknowledged for Gen X in general as children,
Mhm.
we probably would have been able to communicate with each other better
Mhm.
in marriage.
Mhm.
And then you may not be having so many midlife divorces right now. And I think
Yeah.
you brought this up. The millennials have already evolved
Yeah.
in so many ways when it comes to communication. The in general,
Yep.
the men, the millennial men are way more in tune with like the needs at home,
Yep.
the childcare needs. I don't think as many of them view it as I'm babysitting my kids, whereas Gen X men,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
more I'm babysitting while she's getting her nails done.
Yeah.
And again, I think Gen Z will keep going with that. So it is
It's an
evolutionary.
evolutionary thing.
But I think what we're seeing now is there are a lot of divorces happening right now. And I think if you go back, and it brings us back to attachment styles. I think that a lot of the Gen X men were avoidant or fearful avoidant. And maybe you have a lot of Gen X women that were anxious attachment.
Mhm.
And when you put an anxious attachment and an avoidant together, it's not going to work because she's
I
the more
truly
she's
believe
trying,
that's it.
the more
Yeah.
she's trying,
Yeah.
the more he's pulling away.
Yes. We've done that ourselves. You've tried
Yes.
to get my attention. I'm like,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
we're not innocent
Oh
of
no,
it.
no,
And
no.
I'm a huge component of it. There's 2 of us.
Yes.
And,
No, no,
it's,
I mean, I am here to say that you've definitely been an avoidant attachment or a fearful attachment at parts of our marriage.
mhm.
And I've been an anxious attachment in parts of our marriage.
Mhm.
So, and a lot of people think you can't have a successful relationship with an avoidant or a fearful avoidant, um, that you almost have to give up yourself in order to do that. But I'm here to say that's not true.
Well, I think
But I am here to say that it's not easy. It's not easy, and it's not easy to be with an anxious attachment either. And that's why it's important that at least within the marriage, as you grow, your goal should be to become securely attached.
I would say 100% agree. But think of it this way, or a way to think about it. Um, I'm a big Jungian,
Yeah.
and he's very much into the development of the individual and individuation. And marriage isn't easy. Relationships aren't easy, especially something that spans decades, and children, and financial cycles, and jobs, and buying homes or selling whatever. Right? The world's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Um, I think in this attachment style conversation, you float in and out of different things. That's what I found most fascinating about it, looking at it. There's 4 boxes, but there's variations of each. The most important thing I think to do, and the way to prevent divorce, is to probably you have to continue to develop as an individual. And you forced me to develop as an individual by holding me accountable. The kids have forced me to develop as an individual by holding me accountable. There's
Yeah.
just certain things I can't do that or say that are innate to me being from Gen X, right? That shit that's probably inappropriate, and they'll call me on it, or that's just weird, whatever. My sense of humor, right? So it's like you've got to continue to evolve and catch yourself. And then I
Yes.
think at the end of the day, you have to do what you can to bring that to the relationship, and the other person has to do the same, right?
Yes.
So it's not a he or a she thing. What you're describing, I think what we've tapped into or discovered here, and it shouldn't be rocket science here to figure this shit out, but these divorces are because they've grown apart, or one's individuated, or one's developed individually and the other hasn't, right? One's had stunted growth, one hasn't.
Yeah, and
And
I think
there's
there's
lack of
resentment,
communication
and
and
resentment
resentment and
has
all
grown.
that. Yeah.
Resentment has a big
Yeah.
part of it.
Yeah.
Um, so no, I think, and I think that another thing that I don't think gets talked about enough when it comes to relationships is that w- if a man can facilitate the woman in his life to be in her feminine more, then there's true balance. And I think the relationship works better. So women do a lot, men do a lot, but women do carry the emotional baggage of the family and so many other little things that are always in her mind. It's constant, 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 constant. And so if a man can relieve some of the stress baggage from her and allow her to soften, because the more stress and the more baggage, mental baggage and emotional baggage a woman carries from caring for the family, the more harder she's going to get because she's so stressed.
So try to re-explain that in a way that, because what I heard you, but it almost feels like, I'm not taking it this way, but I could picture someone, especially with some of the juvenile commentary we've seen. It almost sounds like you just said, take the problems off her plate. And I don't think you're 100% saying that. You're saying more share in that,
I'm
right?
saying,
But you
no,
mentioned at the
no,
beginning, though, help
it's
her be more
nuance,
feminine. What does
and
that
let her
what
be
does
in
that
her
mean?
feminine. So I think with the whole women working too and all that, which by the way, I want to be clear, I'm totally for women being able to work and having financial freedom and all that, and growth and chasing their dreams. So I want to be very clear. But with them having to take on working outside the home and their other job, because working in the home domestically is a job. I also believe that 100%. Stay-at-home moms are working a job, and working moms are working a job. Working moms are working both jobs. So, it's almost like she she does. You need to men need to work on creating the space to give the women in their lives an opportunity to be in their feminine.
What does
So
that mean?
so I'm gonna explain.
Yeah.
Um, it could be very simple. She's grinding. She's doing what she wants to do, chasing her dreams, working, raising children, cleaning the house, all those things, right? So she's working hard. Balance it. Open her car door. Open the door at the restaurant. Pull out the chair for her. Um, if she's carrying bags, go get the bags. Unload the car, the groceries. Bring her flowers. And I know it sounds simple, but this is what will help her feel like a woman. And I'm not even talking about as a relationship thing. Let her, it helps her be in her feminine in that moment. And it helps her downshift a bit. It helps her soften. And as a result, those little things that are just for her, as a result, she will be more open to the man in her life, if that makes sense.
What's interesting is it makes me think that what you're describing is keep reminding the woman from a man's perspective why you got together in the first place.
Yeah,
Because at
yeah,
some point it wasn't a grind. It was infatuation that led to love, then the rest is history type of thing, right?
true. But it's also, and this is, some people may, this may trigger some people, but it's also being the man in her life.
Mm-hmm. Chivalry.
This isn't a competition.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of men get competitive with the women, with their women partners, which it baffles me. This isn't a competition. And this could be for not just this could be for homosexuals too. I'm not talking about men and women, I'm talking about roles,
Yeah.
right? So the masculine person in the relationship, and I'm going to speak in a heterosexual way, the man, there's times he just needs to be the man
Hmm.
to the woman, because it allows her to not be all the other things. He's creating space for her to just be a woman,
Hmm.
and then she can be in her feminine, because it's almost like when she's doing all that stuff, she's in her masculine, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And so it's like, one of the things I think men love about women is their femininity. It's
Hmm.
the opposite of men.
Yeah.
You love the softness, you love the curves. I'm just speaking physically, but you love the sensitivity, the nurturing tendencies, the ability to make a home look beautiful, to ability to listen and relate and be there for you as a friend, as a and watch them, women, raise your children and love on your children, and all the different things women do that are magical. So help her hold on to that part of her and not become completely in her masculine, because so many women let that's the first thing they have to let go in order to grind as hard as they do. And so the men in their life need to also, like, not need to, but should want to say, I got you, I got you. Let let me I'm going to get you a drink, I'm going to
Hmm.
order for you, it's the smallest things. Take away her decision fatigue. You do it. Take away her decision fatigue, or she shouldn't have to. She can carry that bag, but she shouldn't always have to.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And as a
I,
result, it balances out that male, masculine, feminine in a woman.
yeah.
And I think then it also creates balance in the relationship.
Yeah, I'm thinking too though, could you answer it the same way? Could you provide an answer for um what women could do for men to relieve some of whatever I can't even think, cuz I
But they
understand you, but I don't
do.
totally relate
In
in some
general, they
respects.
do, because in general, they're the ones who do the grocery shopping, do the cooking,
So
all that stuff that men don't have to think about. Women already do
what
it.
well, but that's not true, cuz there are that you're that's not true. There's some men who do it all too. And there's right and we've seen it, some of these guys that, you know, some of the commentary, you can tell that they can't identify with certain aspects because maybe they're doing more, and
Sure,
you
I'm
know.
sure there's situations where there's a man that does all the things, and in that situation, I 100% think she should step up and
Yeah.
start doing some of that stuff. That's a given. Like, I don't understand women who would just sit around the house and not, if they're home, you need to be maintaining that house. That's
Hmm.
your job. Like,
Yeah.
you clean the house, you plan the groceries, you cook the meals, you plan the meals, you take care of the children. If you're a stay-at-home mom, that's what you're doing. That's your job, right? But if you're a working mom, then he needs to also be helping on the state on the at the domestic front, and you're working together as partners. But okay, so in that situation, let's say they're both working, and then they're both working well as partners, and then he should also be doing those little things to keep her in her femininity, but then she should also do those things to help him feel, good about himself too, because men have
That's where I'm going. What are
egos.
I don't know what those things are per
Oh,
se,
if
but
I
what?
had to guess,
Yeah.
I
What,
think it's
sex or
sexual.
something?
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
sexual.
Yeah.
I think it's sexual. Am I wrong?
um no, I think that's
No,
definitely
you
in
can be
play.
honest. Am
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wrong?
No, yeah, no, that's what I'm trying to think of, is maybe that is the main thing. Yeah.
I think for women, it's a bunch of little things. And I think
Yeah.
for men, it's just kind of one thing. I mean, other than, listening and whatever they want to talk about, listening and validating them, and in their interests, like we do all that.
Yeah.
We want to talk about fishing, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's interesting. Not that, but you should do that for us. Like, you don't
Yeah.
really care about certain things, but you're going to listen.
Yeah.
But I think,
What's wrong with
okay,
fishing?
so the way I'm not going to say the way that sex makes men feel is how women feel about all those little things. That's how it makes us feel. Um, I think men get validation through sex in addition to pleasure.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's the way men feel wanted
Mhm.
by their partner. And I think the way women feel wanted sexually too, women want their partner to be sexually attracted to them. Don't get me wrong. But I think these other ways are another way, like doing all those little things I was talking about. A woman also feels that the man in her life wants her and values her with those actions, right? Does that make sense? All those little things I said
Yeah, 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 yeah.
that, but that doing all those things, when I say have it, then that helps her be in her femininity, that usually leads to sex.
Yeah,
See, a woman needs things like that in order to want to be intimate with someone.
yeah.
And I think that's a disconnect with men and women. Men honestly can just be intimate with someone, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they can. Women, for them to fully want to be intimate with, I'm talking about their partner. There's
Yeah, yeah.
not a one night stand. There has to be something there, a feeling like that you're cared for, you're valued, some tenderness to lead you to that
I
space.
do think there's more than sex, though. I'm really pondering it while you've said it, and there definitely is more than sex. But it's funny because as creatures, probably sex is definitely number one, right, for all men.
Yes.
So that's no shocker. But I do think there's. I'm trying to think of other things. Like for us, well, I'll make it about us.
Okay.
Our walks are when we walk in the morning and
Yes.
we're talking and shooting the shit and stuff like that. I think
Yeah.
that's good and healthy. There's
Yes.
got to be other things, though.
Oh, well, doing things
You know.
together. I mean, people travel
Yeah,
together.
yeah,
People like to go out to eat together. Maybe like how people play pickleball,
yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
those different
So
hobbies
common interest
together.
and hobbies.
And I think doing those things together does continue to bond the
Yeah,
relationship
yeah.
and and will as a result make the sex life healthy too.
Hmm.
Because the sex life, but see, here's the other thing. When women go into menopause, perimenopause affects a woman's libido.
Yep.
And so there could be a period where a woman is not as into sex
Hmm.
and she doesn't even know why. Because for Gen X women, we didn't know what was going on. So we're all learning this now, right?
Hmm.
So when they hit like 45 or 43 and all of a sudden they're not wanting to have sex as much,
Hmm.
and they may think, oh, it's because I'm tired. It's because we have so much going on. Even though there was still stuff going on in your 30s and 20s and you wanted to have sex more. But for some, you're just like, oh, I'm just getting older.
Yeah.
And then you learn, oh, it was my hormones. And maybe if people would have talked about it, I could have gone on hormone replacement therapy and my libido would have stayed normal.
Hmm.
So then you're playing catch up. A lot of these women are playing catch up, trying to
Hmm.
get their libido back. Um, and so that can affect the relationship.
Yeah.
Because if you were having a regular sex life
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you're not, and then
Yeah.
he takes that personally
Yeah.
and he doesn't know why, but neither does she.
Yeah.
So there's a breakdown there.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, I feel like we covered some ground here because started off with these attachment styles, but
Yeah.
I really think we got into some dynamics around relationships.
Yeah.
And I feel better for the men because we're not the evil,
No.
ogres of emotional development. I think we certainly are, but I do think women are culpable at this as well. Also, you just touched on a huge point. There's biological events happening at the female level, at the male level too, but
Yeah.
at the female level that you guys didn't talk about it because you were raised by silent generation or boomers or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's new to everybody. And again, I go back to the evolutionary tale. We're talking about it. There was no podcast 20 years ago talking about this shit,
No.
right? So now the people below us, the kids below us there's just more information.
Well, it's one of the reasons we're doing this, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's one of the reasons I continue to want to talk about some of this stuff because I want there to be resources for millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and whatever, as
Mhm.
long as these podcasts are up, some of this stuff I want it to be talked about. So if somebody goes to search about
Yeah.
this, because they don't know what's going on in their life, there's at least a couple here talking about it,
Yeah.
saying, this is normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, there's just so many things again that Gen X was ignored about. And so but like, we'll talk about it. We're not scared. That's
Yeah.
one thing, we're not scared because I know the boomer women, it wasn't talked about. And some boomer women are proud of that. They're like, I just got through it. I didn't talk
Yeah.
like that's being stoic about it. Or I just worked and took care of my man. And
Yeah.
it's like, that's not her. I'm sorry. That's not heroic for women. Like women deserve more than that. And women deserve to have a voice. And so, but you're right. It's not all on the emotional development of men.
Mhm.
I think it was an emotional lack of emotional development on a generation.
I do too.
And then we
Yeah.
got married,
Yeah.
and you said it. We got married, and it was the first time where there was a paradigm shift in that both parents were working, and nothing changed in the domestic front.
Mhm.
We were really sold such a bag of crap. And it was almost like destined for failure. I mean, and I know there are those I
Well,
know
let me
there
ask you
are
this though. Statistically, I don't know this. I don't think you know this, but what is the divorce rate of Gen Xers versus Boomers versus whatever, right?
I don't know, we'll have
And
to look
it's
that up.
yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, maybe if we find a graphic, we'll put it up on the screen for
Yeah,
YouTube. But I don't know, but I do know there's a lot of midlife divorces happening right now, and there's a lot of gray divorces, and that's the boomers. There's a lot of gray
yeah,
divorces too.
yeah,
And I think most of them statistically now, like it used to be the men would want to get divorced because they found a younger version,
hmm,
right? They go through their midlife crisis. But it seems like now it's the women that are leaving. So it's very interesting, but that's something to look into more,
yeah,
you know. But I think that it was destined for failure in some ways, but I think that there were definitely couples that did have good communication. I think there were men that stepped up. There were people that have stayed married. There were people that had great marriages and the dad helped and things went well. So we're not saying like all Gen X parents ended up in the all Gen X kids ended up in these nightmare marriages. That's not what we're saying. But we probably had a higher percentage of different variables than other generations because again it was the shift of the culture of women are leaving the home and working.
hmm,
It's really the first time that's happened on that level. I'm not talking about at wartime. I know women did that
yep.
at wartime, and I know there were women who always worked. I'm talking about a cultural
Well,
shift.
the cultural shift was leaving the house to get a job to continue this concept of an American dream, where you would have a car, two cars, dogs, house, be able to eat, right? Have health care.
Yeah.
And it's now very much a two income society.
Oh, well, that's the other thing is capitalism. How does that play
Yeah.
into it?
Yeah.
Um, that to be able to afford to do that, did you need two people? I mean, a lot of people, there's conspiracy theories on this that the government wanted more tax money, so they set it
Yeah.
up so women would go to work. Wanted to break up the home to have more control over the people.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, there's a lot of that that goes into it, and you can research that. But do I think women going back to work was such a wonderful thing for women to be able to do as an option, but I think it's really crappy that it ended up where women had to go back to work
Yeah. Yeah.
to afford this lifestyle. I think it should have stayed an option. And I think women it should have also be where women have the potential to make as much as men. So if they want the man to stay home,
Yep.
you know, if you're going to do that, then you make sure the women make as much as the men. And then as a couple, they can decide who stays home.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that should have happened here. You should have had women, if they're going to work, you should have been paying them the same as you were paying men. So that
I
that
wouldn't even
couple,
go there.
I know, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying there was a whole bunch of stuff
I'm gonna
there.
get shit on for
And
that, but
I think so. So,
yeah.
but anyways, but as far as attachment styles, um, I do think Gen X men in general, a lot of them are avoidance or fearful avoidance, and a lot of the women though could have been too, and anxious attachment. And then
I feel
it's
like my perspective
mhm.
is, but I could be skewed. I feel like my experience, 100% my perspective experience, and it's not gospel, but I feel like women definitely were more the anxious attachment, 100%. And I do think it's partly because of a higher divorce rate. I do think it's because of moms working as well, right? The nuclear home shifted from dad's work, mom stays home, mom raises the kids. Now dad's working, mom's working, probably a little tension there, and dad's approval of young women is harder to come by. Maybe they're out on sales guys jobs and they're gone 5 days a week. They're traveling a lot. And so there's a lot there. There's a
Yeah.
lot there.
also we're the generation where we were told we have to have a man. And we're the generation that we were told we were taught to compete with each other for
Hmm.
a man. So we had anxiety about that you need to get a
That's
man and
100%.
all that,
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
the younger generations are really enjoying their single time and
Yeah.
honoring that, and don't have, I'm not saying they don't have anxiety about finding their person, but it's just, I feel it's different. It seems different. I could be wrong, but we came out of college, most of us, I'm not saying all of us, but like we need, finding our person and need to find a man. So I don't know. I think the attachment styles are interesting. And I'll be curious to see how our kids' attachment styles are.
Hmm.
Because if it's rooted in your experiences with your caregivers,
Well,
and then did we mess them up in some way?
well, you know, it's interesting. I never thought about it, but I'd be willing to bet each one will have a different style,
Probably.
and it's just because they're unique creatures.
Well, yeah, but it also goes back to your experiences with your caregiver. And yet
Hmm.
you have to remember, like, they each had different quote unquote childhoods because of what age they were.
Hmm.
So different things were going on in our
True.
lives
True.
at different times. So
Plus, we moved.
and we moved. So there
Yeah.
was different, and that could create
Yeah.
different attachment styles. So I'll be curious to see. Hopefully they're all fine and okay and we'll be good.
We'll be the first to know.
I do think that Gen X works so hard that I think a lot of our Gen Z kids are going to be overall be fine when it comes to their attachment styles. But I don't know. I don't know because I know there's a lot of anxiety in that generation. So I don't know.
I have a question, totally different. What do you think the fate of our generation is here with all of this?
Oh my
With all of
gosh.
this, the divorce, the great. I guess I don't know if we're gray divorce. I'm graying. But women reaching this point, claiming their energy, moving on, not being dependent. The men kind of overreacting in some way. And I don't know if overreacting is the right word. That's not the right word, but you know where I'm going. It's the
Yeah,
dynamic.
they're
There's
kind of being
this,
taken off guard.
yeah, there's this
And
shift. What do you
yeah.
think?
Well, I definitely think there's Gen Xers that are going to stay married and go into, God willing, their old age
Hmm.
together. Speaking about us in particular, but we know other people that are married and
Yeah,
Gen
yeah,
X and are happy and all that.
yep.
The ones where the woman has started her new, that's our dog, started her new life. I think you're going to have um a bunch of golden girls. I think you're going to have a lot of women that live together or live in communities together and travel together and enjoy their lives together
Yep.
and support each other. And I think for some women, it'll be the first time, it'll be the most glorious time of their life.
Hmm.
And they say there's a lonely man epidemic, a loneliness epidemic
Is that
among
a trend?
men. Yeah, that's a trend. So I think I th- I don't know what's going to happen with Gen X men who've gone through divorce. We may have a lot of older guys that
Sugar daddies?
I don't know. I think maybe just alone.
Yeah, interesting.
I think, unless you make a lot of money nowadays, you're not a sugar daddy.
Yeah.
You have to make a lot of money now to be that. So there definitely will be Gen X sugar daddies, but um, I think the women are going to be fine. And I don't know if the men are going to be. They may be. They may be just fine. I don't know. But I think the women are going to be fine. And they may I think the women will meet other companions if they choose, but I don't see them in general getting married again.
You know, it's a fascinating thing as I sit here and listen to your answer. As men, you have to do it all. I think there's been a shift. Men have to do it all now in some respects, in that in the thing that comes to mind is just you've got to be masculine, yet you need to be sensitive. And that's a
Yes.
fine line. That's We're not programmed for that per se.
Our
I don't know.
generation isn't.
Yeah.
The men in our generation isn't, but the millennial men. So
Yeah.
that brings up a good point. There were some comments under where men were saying about showing their emotions. Why show your emotions when a woman can use them against you?
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I don't understand that. Can you explain from a man's perspective where some of those men are coming from, that they feel that if they're vulnerable and show their emotions to a woman, she's going to use it as a weapon against them?
Oh man, I don't know. I don't know. Um wish I had a little more time to think about it, even though I have thought about it. I think it's sort of maybe by showing your emotions, we're programmed that's a weakness, unless it's anger and rage, then we're strong, right? But if we have to show your emotions and cry or empathize, I don't, we should all be empathetic to everything. So it's more, it's maybe that next level down of empathy or a vulnerability of I'm afraid of something or I'm afraid of this or I'm afraid of that, or maybe it's professing your love. So I don't know, right? What is that vulnerability they're talking about? Um, but I could certainly see, a woman who might be like, "Oh, you're so weak. You get upset watching this or when this, whatever." I could see a woman doing that if
Mm.
for whatever reason, people in general can be crazy and wacky, right? So it feels like that would be more on the fringe. You know what I'm saying?
But for seeing that a lot of men had
Yeah.
said that, that means that there's a lot of women out there doing that. Or maybe
Yeah.
their moms did that to them.
But what's an example? Do you think? What are they talking about? Where
Maybe in the heat of an argument, the woman throws it in their face about a time that
that's the
they
only thing I can think of.
showed vulnerability.
But what level of what type or level of or instance of vulnerability would you be able to throw back on someone?
I don't
I
know.
don't
I mean,
know.
other than crying, but
Yeah.
when I say women, men sharing emotions, I'm not thinking about crying. I'm more thinking about being open, being vulnerable, sharing, like you
Well, so
said.
there you go. When I think of it, if I represent my generation, to me, it's more crying.
So they may think crying.
Maybe
They're just thinking crying. Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah. So, and then some of the men said that it's their job as men to you don't and when you're in a situation you don't experience your emotions, and if you need to, you experience them alone. You go to a place and experience them alone, but it's your job to manage them, and that showing emotion in a situation is a detriment to trying to resolve whatever's going on. That emotions are a weakness and will get in the way of
Well,
fixing a problem.
so, and I think that's probably accurate. If you were sitting on a park bench crying, and a man was sitting on the park bench crying, which is more acceptable, which would be more common, which would be more like less out of the norm. That's a
Yeah.
woman, right?
Yeah.
So the society in general is not set up to let men cry. I'm not saying we need to. I don't, right? And,
Yeah.
and if you do, you're weak. No. Um, but it's not set up for that. It's not facilitated to that degree. That's not our cultural norm.
Yeah.
It's.
It's true. But then I think that Gen X men look down on millennial men and Gen Z men because they feel like the ones that are more empathetic and more in touch with their emotions, because we did get comments about we're the last real men. We're
Yeah.
the last generation of real men. And the men after us are weak.
I honestly can relate to that, identify with that at a certain degree, whether that's right or wrong. I cannot relate to younger men who are as emotional or sensitive as they are. And that's a problem for me, right? That's my problem, right? So I don't hold that against them. I don't view it as my own flaw, but it is what it is.
But you know what? We've talked about how millennial men and I think Gen Z men will end up being like this, are much better communicators in general in their relationships and
Hmm.
help on the domestic front more than Gen X men did,
Yeah.
and more in tune with the women, what
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
women need. And
Yeah.
so I think it takes being in tune with that sensitive part of your personality
Yeah.
to be able to be a full partner for the woman in your life.
It's my evolutionary
Yeah.
thinking, right?
But
Men evolve, women
yeah.
evolve, society evolves, and you kind of hope it's all for the better.
But here's the thing. Even those millennial women, I think women in general, um, I think women in general are attracted to high masculinity, but want sensitivity along with it. So I think the ideal man for a woman, for in general, is the guy who's a man, very masculine, kind of, rough around the edges, all that, gets shit done, takes care of everything. But then she wants him to be sensitive and empathetic on the domestic front where she needs him. And that is what can be challenging for men.
Yes. Well, you just summed up some of the commentary that men are feeling, that women want it all. What else can I do? Now she, this and that. That's what's happening. That's
Right. Right. But I don't know. Are they talking about, I feel like they're talking about literally what they want us to keep doing more. I'm talking more, um, just, I don't know, emotionally, or, what they're bringing to the table characteristically, I guess, if that makes sense.
what do you mean?
Like, be a man, but also still be able to be sensitive.
Yeah, that's what you want from me, right? It's like, can you be a little more sensitive, you asshole? You know, it's the
And
line.
that may be the timeless
I think it's the
problem.
timeless tension.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's that. But I mean, I think there's so much. Everything we've talked about is valid. But I think men want women to participate, hold their own, do things around the house, if possible, bring some money, and if not, if they're fine with them being home, taking care of everything on the home front, but also be feminine
Yeah.
and be sexual.
It's almost, it's
So
almost like be Mary Poppins in public and a hooker in the bedroom
right,
type of
that's
thing.
the
Yeah,
man's dream,
yeah,
right? And then a woman wants like a
yeah,
masculine man who can fight if needs to, can
yeah,
protect. She wants a protector,
yeah,
but she also wants someone who's going to do the dishes, cook
yeah,
dinner once in a while, give the kids a bath, and not
yeah,
complain about it, and
yeah,
not act like he's doing her a favor.
yeah.
That's the thing, is when a man does stuff like that, it's a favor. But when a woman does it, it's viewed as her duty.
I think you're just summing up a dysfunctional relationship, though, or at least a phase in a dysfunctional relationship, right? Where the man thinks he's doing her a favor.
I think that's a generational thing.
You think so?
I mean, would you say there was a time in our early marriage when if you did something, like, let's say if you, I don't know if you ever did this, but let's say if you would have given one of the kids a bath,
Of course I did.
um, or did something, you would have thought you were helping me out, and really think about it.
No, I'm trying to think about that.
Or like, let's say you went grocery shopping, that you were helping me out.
I think the most tangible thing would be like doing the dishes.
Okay.
I feel like I was definitely actively involved with the kids. Maybe not so much baths. I'd take a bath with them type of
Yeah,
thing,
you did
but
do that. Yeah.
not,
When they were
you know,
very, very little, to be clear. Very little.
yeah,
Babies.
nothing
Babies.
perverted here. But I'm not a wash the dishes type of guy. I'm not a clean up the kitchen type of guy. I will vacuum.
No. Yeah.
I'll vacuum.
Okay, I'm talking about though in our early marriage. I'm talking
Yeah.
about now, when we were in the trenches. If you would have done the
Pre
dishes.
or post kids?
We have the kids. Everything's
Okay,
going
yeah.
on. Let's say you do the dishes.
Yeah.
Honestly, don't you think you kind of would have viewed it as you're helping me out?
I'll throw you one. Sure. I don't know if I don't remember doing the dishes,
You
but
didn't.
yeah.
But
But you never mowed the lawn.
True.
You never shoveled the
Yeah.
driveway.
I mean, we've talked
Never
about that in our
cleared the
episodes.
gutters,
So, and for anyone who doesn't know, I was a stay-at-home mom. I did have a couple jobs part-time briefly, but we decided that before we got married on the roles. And we are Gen X, and we went way traditional. And then things have shifted, I'd say, in the last 5 years for sure. In midlife, because as I went through menopause and went through different things, and then our kids getting older, and more time in the home, like more time between us and stuff. I wanted some change, and to give you credit, you listened to me, you heard me, and you continue to try to do things to be understanding and supportive, especially when it comes to like health stuff and menopause. Like and if if I'm like, I'm feeling emotional, like you have not belittled me, you've been there. And that's what it takes. It just takes evolving with your partner.
I think it takes evolving. I'm
Yeah.
not perfect, but and I don't even try to be perfect. You know that,
Yeah.
obviously.
Oh, I know.
But I at least try. I try
Yeah.
at something.
You do. And yeah. But if that's one piece of advice to the men, just evolve with her as she's going through this huge phase. Just be patient and try to be supportive.
But I think too, though, to your credit, you started researching this shit a while ago, and
Yes.
you were trying to get yourself prepared.
Yeah.
So you've done various things to be proactive.
I try to be proactive.
Proactive, and so my advice to women is take care of your own business too, right?
Oh, absolutely. You can't put your head in the sand, but a lot of women don't know. And
Yeah.
to be honest with you, this started for me. I trace it back around 42.
Mhm.
So I didn't really start doing anything for a good 8 to 9 years because I didn't know what was happening. My
Mhm.
40s were rough, and
Oh, you're saying you think you hit
I was in
menopause at
perimenopause.
perimenopause at 42.
Yes.
Interesting.
And that's a whole nother thing because I was going through thyroid disease and perimenopause. I
Yeah.
didn't know I had perimenopause. I thought everything that was going on with me was just thyroid disease.
Mm,
I was also going through perimenopause.
mm.
So I got more educated in the last like few years, but no, I didn't know what was happening. And I want to do an episode on that. That whole journey of, but no, women, perimenopause can hit at age 35. For any women listening that are younger, research perimenopause because you may start having symptoms and you may think, what's happening to me? And it's perimenopause. And I could have done different things, taken different supplements, maybe done HRT. I could have done different things in my 40s that would have made my life so much easier if I would have known. So, yeah. But now that I know, yeah, we have communication. But we had rough times during that,
Well, I was gonna say,
you
so I'm
know?
literally a saint.
No,
I made it through that.
no, 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 no,
Yeah,
no.
I'm a saint.
You had your own stuff, dude. We won't get into that in this episode. We've talked enough about ourselves. But anyway, so that's attachment styles. I mean, a brief synopsis
The
of
first
it.
10 minutes.
Yeah. And then we brought into ourselves and all that, like our own attachment styles. But I encourage anyone, if you're interested in this, to research it more because it is fascinating. There are quizzes you can take to figure out what your attachment style is. And also, if you're a parent, you can kind of, as your children grow and become adults, you can maybe recognize what their attachment
Well,
style is.
I think too, one thing you said that I think is interesting is, and this is probably a way to apply this if interested, is if you're feeling weird about a relationship,
Mm,
maybe ask yourself why. Go to one of these little charts. It's fascinating stuff. Like you said, you were anxiously attached to certain people, and you're like, "What the hell's going on here?"
yeah.
You want to definitely move on from that type of thing.
Oh, for sure. I think as you get involved with someone for a relationship, if you know your attachment style to begin with, and then as you get to know them and you can figure out their attachment style, I think that can only help your relationship or it can help you figure out this isn't going to work.
Yeah,
But I think for sure, the more knowledge, the better. Self-awareness is key,
100%.
100%.
Yeah,
So that's that conversation. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We kind of went all over the place, but we stayed within a little bit of a realm here of
uh,
relationships and attachment styles.
yeah. And I would say take it easy on each other out there, right?
Yes.
Give each other
Give each other
some
some
grace.
grace,
Yeah,
when we're not, I'm not talking about though abusive situations. I
yeah,
always say that, not unless it's an abusive situation. So, yeah, but so hopefully everyone enjoyed this discussion and we will probably be putting up some graphics, I know, and maybe even some links in the description of that can take you to some further research about attachment
yeah.
styles and we'll see.
Google it. Google attachment styles, and there's a whole
Oh yeah.
world out there.
Oh yeah. And we'll see you next time. Bye.